I don't think people realize how big an undertaking it is, how many people it takes to sort of achieve the level of quality and scope that we have.
Assassin's Creed 3 is a big-scale game. The amount of things that are produced per day, that are developed per day, it's amazing.
The team has grown to be several hundred people in 5 studios around the world, all of them working on really specific elements, so the amount of work is just staggering.
In total, it's over 30 hours of gameplay, and we have 2.5 hours of cinematics, which is as much as any major length movie, or even more.
We have an amazing team on AC3. Everyone's super passionate about the project. We really all work really hard together as a team, and I think everyone's pushing to ship an amazing game. The feedback we've been getting from fans, from critics, it's just driving everyone even more and more.
When we started AC3, we knew it had to be big and ambitious and different. It would be a challenge because so many things Alex wanted to do didn't exist or weren't possible at that time. We took it on us to make it happen. Stuff like the snow for the seasons or the ocean, you just had to create it from scratch.
It's very rare in your career that you get an opportunity to try and go for the gold medal, and we really felt like this was our shot at it. A lot of tired people on the floor right now, but a lot of happy, tired people. We've always tried to pick exciting periods in history, then drop the player in, so they're exploring that time as well as our fictional story.
Make ready. Present.
The American Revolution was a very pivotal time because the concept of self-government, as opposed to being governed by royals, it was very radical for the era.
It's a great setting for a game because there's high stakes. It was the founding of a nation. It was a time when an individual could make a difference. It was all or nothing. They had to win or die.
The American Revolution begins as a dispute over taxes, and as it unfolds over the course of the 1760s and 1770s, it becomes a contest that eventually defines the modern conception of liberty.
The themes that are present in the history, these ideas of power and slavery, of control versus freedom, are not just debates within the American Revolution, but also debates within the history of the franchise.
The Revolutionary War was an incredibly brutal experience.
If you think about these weapons, muskets and flintlock pistols, they're one-shot weapons, they're very inaccurate. Cannonballs were ripping off limbs. This is something you just don't really hear about in the history books, and something we wanted to bring to life in the game.
I think that the primary draw of the AC franchise is the fantasy of being an assassin. To be this guy that can sort of move in and out of public and private spaces, who has all of these different weapons and abilities at his command, that's part of the secret society.
Connor is our new hero in Assassin's Creed 3. He's half British, half Mohawk. He's humble and more grounded to nature type of person.
We did a lot of research into Native American culture. We've recorded dialogue in their native language.
The main character, he is half Ganyagehaga. He speaks Ganyageha. It's not a very book language, it's more oral. My job is to make sure that their intonation is good and their pronunciation is on.
Excellent. I loved it.
And we've tried very hard to reflect their culture as accurately as possible.
His name, Radun Hagedum, it refers to a life that is scratched, meaning that he had to struggle to survive.
Connor, as a hero, is someone who sees himself as a defender of the people.
He's more inclined to justice than revenge.
One thing to declare our independence. Now, my friend, we must make it so.
Connor's goal is to assassinate key historical figures at major battles, at major events during the Revolution.
He's a stealth operator. He can come out and viciously make a great kill, then blend right back in. using your battle space around you. I mean, it's never you're just stand there and box another guy. It's turning around, finding the object next to you, slamming on the guy's head, using the tools that you have as weapons to take out your enemies. It's unconventional. It's guerrilla warfare.
If George Washington would have had Connor on his team, he wouldn't have needed many other people.
Anvil Next is an engine that gives us the possibility to do things that were not possible to do before.
The weather system, the seasons, the formable snow, bigger worlds in general, the ocean. It's the sum of 3 years of improvements that we've built upon.
Brand new navigation system, brand new combat system, 2,500 characters on screen at any one time, being able to cut through interiors in the city. Anvil Next is a massive leap forward in terms of gameplay opportunities.
Cliffs, trees, climbable stuff, the water, that was pretty exciting but also very challenging.
We've got the frontier as well. We've got two of our major cities, Boston and New York.
Once we dug up maps from the period, we tried to match street for street or major avenue for major avenue. We recreated Boston and New York at about 1:3 scale.
We set out with crazy ambitions for this game, and with Anvil Next, it brings the experience to a whole new level.
The fascinating thing for us is that we can bring history to life. We can actually make it a place that's explorable and vibrant and real. We hope we're offering by far the biggest and best Assassins yet. Something we really wanted to emphasize was the sheer brutality of combat in the period.
We've all seen the paintings of the Revolution, and death is glorified, death is angelic, but it wasn't that way on the battlefield. It was a brutal conflict.
It feels that you're constantly going through dynamic fights, and that's not something technically we could do in the past. So it was like a personal challenge on the team to say, no, I think we can do this.
These armies are filled with different types of weapons. So, you know, you have everything from muskets, you have grenadiers, you have guys with boarding axes.
Being shot by a musket would be an awfully painful way to go. The caliber size of the ball was at least 3 or 4 times as large as anything that any modern military is using today. Nobody employs this size weaponry anymore on an individual soldier level. When it hit somebody, it didn't drill a neat little hole through them. It cleaved away arms and took heads off shoulders, and I mean, you'd be covered in that.
After the muskets were discharged, they would charge with their bayonets. What basically is a giant spear, and he has every intention of running that through you.
The bayonet affixes onto the end of the musket. It has 3 sides to it. When it made a wound, it could not close and therefore could not be stopped bleeding.
They would shoot and then they would march, and that hand-to-hand combat was really brutal. And whether it's people using a bayonet affixed on the end of a musket, a small hatchet, this is a kind of killing that is very mano a mano.
All the animations, all the weapons are brand new.
It was interesting to start on a new style of fighting that is much more close and aggressive.
Connor's favorite weapon is the tomahawk, obviously super deadly in hand-to-hand combat. Also the bow and arrow. It fits with his native heritage and it's lethal.
The rope dart, it's a real accurate Chinese tool that we found the references for that period as well. He can use it from the ground, so he can bring the enemy towards him. It gives him the ability, for example, on a tree, to hang someone from above. In Assassin's Creed 3, the one thing that we've decided to do is to revamp the fight system from scratch.
wanted the skill in the combat in the game to be about transitioning from character to character by choosing the right moves, by performing them correctly. It allows you to basically mow your way through large numbers of people if you're good enough without stopping.
We really tried to push the concept of him always being on the move. So we've got this great new move called the running assassinate. So basically you'll see Connor start to run. He'll use his tomahawk and be able to take down one enemy. Then he'll start running, picking up a musket as he goes, and being able to use that musket to shove it through one target and kill another one behind him. It's pretty cool.
What do you do if you go into a bunch of guys with muskets and they try and shoot you? So we had to figure out, can you dodge them? Can you run away? And we've added all these options, but our big one is the meat shield, where you can grab a guy and he gets shot instead. Our mocap guys are stuntmen. We spend a long time with them rehearsing and figuring out exactly what would be the greatest choreography. We had to go through, you know, like multiple people.
Your goal as a player is to move quickly into close combat. So we wanted a character who was very, very swift, who was able to sort of charge enemies, to assassinate on the run, and sort of get into close combat as quickly as possible.
Connor is trained in a very different style of fighting to the British soldiers.
The close quarters flow of the combat that's happening between the punches, the kicks, and everything else is indicative of what happens in the real world.
I'm very impressed by the moves that they do. It's cool to see push kicks and axe kicks and different sort of takedowns that are done correctly and very believable when they're done.
Right hand, right. Punch to the face, boom, to the throat, to the groin, finish with boom.
This is something new for us that we're really proud of. It's fast, it's fluid, and you go through these guys like butter.
I think in a way we're still like actors, all of us, is whether you're a programmer or animator, we're really trying to act out what we want to bring to the game. At least someone on the team is always standing up, acting out different things. We've actually got a bunch of different toy props, so whenever we're starting to create a new weapon or new moves for a weapon, it's a lot of fun on the floor when we're coming up with these behaviors.
Connor is essentially the first guerrilla fighter. He's someone whose goal is always to move behind enemy lines, to pick off his target, and to escape.
Employing guerrilla tactics, or what we now know today as asymmetric warfare, was something that truly was a component of the American Revolution.
They learned what we would think of as guerrilla-style warfare. You know, you sort of hit quickly and then disappear.
American tactics were really frowned upon by the British because the Americans did adapt the tactics that were used by the Native Americans from the French and Indian War.
For people who lived far from a city, they had to rely on their own abilities, so they became skilled hunters. And so when they did eventually fight in a war, they had certain skills, not about how to march in a line, but how to hunt.
There's this group of rangers, the Green Mountain Boys that were from Connecticut. They were like the most feared rangers. What they would do is they would come out and they would shoot very long distances. They could be pretty accurate for a long distance, and then they would hide behind the guys with the bayonets and reload, then come back out and shoot again. And these guys were just, you know, bush boys. I mean, they weren't really soldiers at all. They just were really good at shooting their rifles.
First big battle at Lexington and Concord takes place on a New England town green. And as the soldiers march back to Boston, they are marching along a dirt road lined by stone. You know, it's not the most effective strategy wearing your bright red coat and march through the woods while some farmer's trying to shoot at you.
The Americans brought a tactic that they couldn't really cope with. They essentially took it away from the battlefield and they started guerrilla tactics.
Connor is the brand new hero in the game. He's a brand new assassin. He's half Native American, half European. We wanted to build that base conflict into his background.
Why are you here?
When he begins his journey, he has a very clear sense of what is right and what is wrong. He is forever motivated by a desire to do the right thing.
Commander, Connor. He's fighting for freedom and he's fighting against tyranny.
You as Connor, as the assassin, are the critical part of the American Revolution.
that we wanted to deal with the historical figures was for you to meet them sort of over the course of your journey in a way in which the history books wouldn't normally portray them.
General Putnam.
Many of the founders were very tough individuals. Many of them were the equivalent of the modern badass.
Our founding fathers were very hard, disciplined, dedicated individuals who wanted freedom, who wanted liberty, who wanted to express themselves their own way and not be controlled.
These founding fathers were comfortable with war, and they were warriors.
Do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes.
Connor doesn't know much of the European ways at first, and then he gets to learn about these guys, these heroic figures. So for Washington, for instance, he sees that very strong guy, and Connor believes in him.
George Washington was not the old, feeble man on the $1 bill. During the time of the Revolution, George Washington would have been in his 40s. This was where the legend was being made.
You see Washington as he was during the Revolution, which is a younger man, an athletic man.
George Washington really was the first action hero.
George Washington, he's probably the next most important character that we had to work on. We must have done so many versions of him and just constantly making him look larger and larger than life.
We really tried to look at areas, that were really noticeable. The profile of Washington, very noticeable. He's also one that kind of ages as the game gets older. There'll be a discernible difference between the earlier version of George Washington and then as he ages and starts to become more the Washington that people really identify with.
He looks like the George Washington I visualize.
Basically, you get to talk with George Washington, to interact with George Washington. You have missions with George Washington.
Connor is moving in and out of both the Revolution and the rest of the history. Whenever he sees conflict between two groups, he takes the side of the greater good.
We've been working very closely with the Mohawk consultant on values as well on language.
We are Gunyetgahaga. Gunyetgahaga means the people of the Flint.
Agorateka, you're doing great.
And our language is called Gunyetgeha.
Every time that he's with his people or in his village, they speak the language, which I think is really cool.
Connor, as a Native American character, is very familiar with Native American war clubs, with the tomahawk, with the bow.
He's got very refined sense of hunting and tracking. He's been raised with the ability to navigate this environment.
Connor has a lot of his ancestry's strength from the Mohawks. He's strong, he's agile, he's able to run in the wood very quickly. It's really his nature, that's really his home.
He's essentially described as the agile brute. So he's brutal, but he's agile. He's heavy, but he can still jump very far.
He's grown up in an environment that is oftentimes very violent, and he has adjusted accordingly.
Every time he jumps, he doesn't just gracefully float through the air. He has to swing his arms. He has to use a lot of his arms and a lot of arm work to get through the trees, to push off things, to jump and swing. We had so many different versions of Connor, and he started off really slim, and then we bulked him up by adding fur and cloaks and all these things.
Instead of this thin, lean assassin, like he fills out his coat. He's just a warrior in every sense.
The animation team has built over an hour of new animations just for Connor alone.
We started by looking at lots of military moves and even traditional ones of how you would fight with a tomahawk. We looked at that and we just thought it wasn't awesome enough. So we went really brutal, and it wasn't just throwing in blood.
We put a lot of time into the navigation elements, and we've completely redone our climb system. We really wanted it to be much more organic.
There's so much variety in what he can climb and how he can do it.
We have a whole set of new navigation abilities that just show off the fluidity of the assassin as he moves through these environments.
We thought it was a great opportunity to allow people to climb, trees, cliffs, natural landmarks, as well as the buildings that they climbed.
We had to add different ways of climbing up to cover cracks and also side cracks. So we have vertical cracks and side cracks.
We knew we had to support all sorts of organic angles so that the forest looks right, and still the behavior of the assassin would be fluid in any context.
He's not there to run against 500 men pitched on a battlefield. That's not his style. He's there to sneak out around behind them, climb up a cliff, do some tree running and drop down in amongst them and take out the commander and get out of there before anyone sees him.
Connor moves are directly inspired by parkour.
Parkour is basically all about efficiency of movement, the quickest manner from point A to point B. When you see specific parkour movements, Connor doing a lazy vault or a dive roll, now, the movements themselves are very accurate. Connor moves in the game like I want to move in real life. There are very few games out there that really tap into parkour free running. You've got the fight or flight, and this uses the fight and the flight to its fullest. Because Connor is a badass assassin, and he can move like hell.
We wanted Connor to be a dual-handed specialist, so basically he's ambidextrous, he can fight with both hands.
When he lands, the ground shakes, and when he fights, you know, people are getting knocked left, right, and center. He's very brutal.
He is battle-driven. He's brutality, and is the type of assassin who comes up and kills without question or hesitation.
The soldiers were not really able to go up against Connor. Connor's a killing machine. He's a ninja in a tank with a Wolverine in there.
Ever since Europeans arrived in North America, they had been involved in shipping goods back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. In order to make this economic system work, the British tried to control the goods that are going to the colonies. And it was those goods coming back and forth which made a few places on eastern North America important.
Whether it's the Boston Tea Party or the Boston Massacre. Fire! We have these big historical events that we can situate our game around. All of these events that people have a rough understanding of, but they've really never experienced.
If you were to transport yourself to Boston in 1775, you would see a city vastly different from the modern city that's there today. Because Boston is really just a small town.
Boston was the center of disaffection with British rule. It's the home of Samuel Adams.
If you were a rabble-rouser like Sam Adams, and you needed something done that wasn't quite legal, you knew how to find the guys to be in the mob so that you wouldn't be caught afterwards. It was that kind of a city.
The British long thought that Boston was the center of the problem, and if they could deal with Boston, the rest of the colonies would fall in line.
Boston is the center point of the Revolution. It's where the ideas first circulated. It's where some of the most important moments happened at the beginning and spread from there.
When the British closed the port of Boston, that's when the revolution really started. They couldn't tolerate that.
We had to go back and get our historian to find us accurate maps from the era of what Boston and New York looked like. These are actual replicas of the cities.
If you're familiar with those cities, you should have that sort of eerie feeling of finding familiar sights.
We really wanted to push the animations and just make it look like it's a real living world.
As you walk through the crowd, you'll also see animals in the streets.
They would have a pig, they just clip his ear in a certain way, and they'd let him go in the street. And then he'd eat garbage, and then when it was time to eat the pig, you'd go and find your pig, and you'd slaughter it and eat your pig.
We've got a lot of new ingredients that just bring a new, fresh feeling to the gameplay inside of the cities.
We have these great new stalking zones that you're going to find throughout the cities. It's a great way for you to remain hidden from your enemies and actually be able to sneak up to them so that you could assassinate.
We've got this amazing dynamic weather system in, so we can see not just the time of day passing, but also going in and seeing the same environments, not just in the summer, but in the winter as well.
Even though it's a much more condensed area in the city, you actually have to be more careful.
There will be carts moving past, so as you're running along the buildings, escaping some snipers, you'll be able to just dive off into a hay cart that's driving past. You'll be able to jump out of that, free run quickly through the streets, through a building, and jump out the other side. See people inside freaking out as you run past through their kitchen.
Living on the frontier was extremely difficult. Not only did you have harsh winters, cold, freezing temperatures, in the summer you had heat, humidity, so it was a gamble every year that you were out on the frontier whether you're going to make it or not.
For AC3, the biggest difference is just having access to the frontier. So this huge wilderness area that you can sort of explore at your own pace.
It's a forest, the navigation in a very new environment, and a very organic environment as well.
In the frontier, you'll be able to navigate through deep snow, but also snow does impact your gameplay. It will slow down you as well as your enemies.
Once we decided that we were going to build the frontier, we realized obviously we need to populate that area. So animals became a very big deal. We have over 24 different species of animals in the game. There's an entire hunting loop that you can engage in. Whenever you're building elements such as animals, you're halfway trying to be real and halfway trying to fulfill that fantasy of what people expect.
That's the important thing about the bear. It has to be something that when you see one, you're scared in the game because it's so difficult. Like, we have wolves and you should be able to take them down, but the bear's the big one.
If you're a part of the push out into the frontier, you're dealing with animals on your doorstep every day and not many people to help you out. It's a very dangerous time. Games are built around challenge, so anytime you have a risk, whether it's the risk of animals, then this is something that allows us to build gameplay.
One of the great new features we have in the frontier is the new tree running. Connor being really fluid and being able to navigate through the trees. The frontier is really our new playground.
This war at sea was truly a global war and involved not only the British, but the French and the Spanish and the Dutch.
Naval engagement of that period was all about closing the distance.
Boarding is the end game. You've got to be able to close with the enemy, get alongside, then get on board to steal his ship. You want to take that ship intact if you can, because that's where you get your prize. The prize is whatever is on that ship that you want.
When the revolution started, the British had over 130 ships of the line. Americans had none. So they had to build a navy from scratch in a hurry. Now the French helped a little bit and donated a couple of ships. But then Yankee ingenuity kicked in and the privateer was born.
A privateer is a legalized pirate, a private vessel that operates with the authorization of the government to attack enemy commerce.
The glory of the privateer was if you caught a British ship, a cargo ship out on the high seas and captured it, you brought it back to port, those goods were sold and you got a share in that.
During the Revolutionary War, over 2,000 British merchantmen were captured by privateers. That's over $66 million worth of commerce. The privateers held the line and kept us alive. They bled the British white.
By the middle decades of the 18th century, the British had the most powerful navy in the world.
The Royal Navy was very well organized and was very disciplined. The privateers, on the other hand, benefited from not being as disciplined, but being well-trained and very aggressive.
It became a real problem for the British because they had to use their warships to guard their convoys.
The privateers could exercise a tremendous amount of initiative to take advantage of changes in weather, to sneak up, to use any advantage that they could.
A privateer was very much a mercenary. If you saw a ship on the distance and chased it, and it happened to be a British man-of-war, you were going to prison. But you were not going to be treated well. You were not thought of as an enemy soldier or sailor. You were thought of as basically a pirate.
Naval warfare was absolutely decisive to success in the American Revolution. Commerce comes by sea, at the same time invaders come by sea. You control the sea and you control the conflict.
It's a huge part of the historical period. The revolution is won pretty much at Yorktown by a blockade of ships.
You know, we can't ignore this part of the history. This is critical. This is something that we have to do. We started a whole team up just to specifically focus on the naval experience.
Naval combat has been a huge challenge. The technology of the wind, the water simulation has been a massive undertaking for the team.
Initially, we didn't even think it was feasible because it's a big moving structure.
It's a full simulation on high seas where Connor is controlling a ship, he's controlling a crew as well, so he's kind of the master and commander on the ship.
Very exciting. I mean, you are on a moving vessel that is very much part of the sea itself.
This is something that we wanted to engage in and build for the game.
That was a huge challenge that we set ourselves and actually turned out pretty good.
If you haven't played any Assassin's Creed games before, we really think this is a great point to get on board.
It is a new story, it is a new character.
This team is full of people who love making Assassin's Creed, who are delivering just an astoundingly polished and fun experience. As a creator, nothing gets better.
To be frank, it just looks great. Seeing all of this coming together at the end, it's amazing.
For new fans, really, this is about as good as it gets. It's by far the biggest and best Assassins yet.